It was Christmas time. The drivers, firemen, guards and the Fat Controller had been at home eating Christmas dinner and opening presents. But now the holiday was over and Thomas and his friends knew they would soon be very busy. All over the island of Sodor, aunts and uncles, cousins and nieces, nephews and grandparents were preparing to say goodbye to their families and return to their own homes. The bigger engines, such as Henry and Gordon, would pull extra carriages that day, but they didn't mind. It was good to have steam in their boilers again and to move into the crisp, cold air. Thomas watched the other engines puff importantly away. Soon it would be his turn. Then he realized that his driver had not arrived, nor was his fireman anywhere to be seen, and there was no coal in his firebox. His two carriages, Annie and Clarabel, shivered and grumbled in the shed. What was the matter? Bertie the bus came into the yard. "Hello, Thomas," he said. "Are you too tired to go out today?" By this time, Thomas was feeling cross. "Of course I'm not too tired," he replied. "I'm waiting for my instructions. In fact, I've been waiting for hours. It's not good enough. When I see the Fat Controller, I shall say so." "Thomas," said Bertie, but Thomas wouldn't stop to listen. "I didn't mean to crash into the station master's house last year when he was eating breakfast, and I've already promised that I won't fall down a mine again, so why doesn't he believe me?" "Thomas," said Bertie, "there's something I think you should know." "Just wait till I see him," finished Thomas. And then Thomas did. The Fat Controller, wearing a brand new hat, stepped off the bus. "I did try to warn you," whispered Bertie. Thomas was sorry he had been so cross. Would he be in trouble again? But the Fat Controller did not appear to have heard him complaining. "Good morning, Thomas," he said, smiling. "Did you have a good rest over the Christmas holidays?" "Yes, thank you," said Thomas. "I'm glad," said the Fat Controller, "because I have important work for you." Thomas was pleased. "With all the bad weather we have been having," said the Fat Controller, "a lot of Christmas mail has been delayed and will be arriving from the mainland this evening. Percy will be waiting at the depot, but he won't be able to pull the mail train on his own. I think he could do with some help. This afternoon I would like you to go to the mail depot. The postman will be waiting for you and will load sacks of letters and parcels into Annie and Clarabel." Thomas was very proud. He had never been given so much responsibility. His driver and fireman reported for duty, and by early evening they arrived at the depot. The postmen were waiting for them, just as the Fat Controller had said they would be. Percy was very excited to see his friend and challenged him to a race. "Oh, I don't know," said Thomas. "The mail is too important to take risks." "Don't worry," said Percy. "I know the route as well as I know my own buffers." When all the mail was loaded and his driver had been given instructions as to where to deliver the mail, Thomas started to leave. "Can't catch me!" shouted Percy, and he rushed out of the depot. Unfortunately, the cold weather had iced up the points. Percy slid over them and came off the rails. "Oh, no!" cried Percy. "What are we going to do now?" said Thomas. One of the postmen telephoned the Fat Controller at home. It was very late and the Fat Controller was just about to go to bed. Nervously, the postman explained the situation. As he finished, he said, "So I'm afraid Percy has been rather naughty. What do you think we should do?" The Fat Controller was still in a good mood after Christmas. "I won't be able to arrange a crane until we are less busy. Tell Thomas he would have to do his best to deliver all the mail himself. As for Percy..." The Fat Controller started laughing. "Accidents will happen, I suppose. Ho, 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 ho." Percy was glad that the Fat Controller was not angry with him. "I'm sorry, Thomas," he said. "Will you be able to manage?" "I should think so," replied Thomas. "Yes, I'm sure we will. Won't we, Annie and Clarabel?" Annie and Clarabel weren't at all sure, as dozens of sacks filled with letters and parcels were transferred from the mail train to them. "They're very heavy," complained Annie. "I'm full," moaned Clarabel. "Percy is silly," they grumbled together. But Thomas remembered the time one winter when he wouldn't wear a snowplough and had ended up stuck in a snowdrift. "Don't be too hard on him," he said to the carriages. "We all make mistakes." Soon all the mail had been transferred into Annie and Clarabel. The postmaster explained carefully to Thomas and his driver the places where the mail had to be dropped off to be collected next morning and then delivered through the letterboxes. "Are you sure you'll be all right now?" he said. "Of course," replied Thomas. The fireman stoked the boiler and the driver opened the valve. Thomas's wheels started turning. With much creaking and groaning from Annie and Clarabel, they moved slowly forward. "It really is heavy," gasped Thomas. Fortunately, the first part of the track out of the mail depot was downhill. Before long, they were making good speed. The stars shone brightly in the winter sky. As the night wore on and his driver dropped off mail sacks at the stations, Thomas's load grew lighter. Annie and Clarabel were beginning to enjoy being out at night. They chattered noisily until the driver told them to be quiet. When Thomas stopped to take on water, the two carriages fell fast asleep. "Shall we wait a while?" asked the fireman. "I'm tired as well." "We can't," said Thomas. "We have to deliver all the mail before people get up in the morning." Just then, the driver looked up at the sky. There was not a star to be seen. "We'd better get a move on," he said. "I think a snowstorm is on its way." Reluctantly, Annie and Clarabel woke up. Thomas and the mail train made good time, but even so, dawn was breaking when they arrived back at the engine shed. The fat controller was waiting for them. "Well done, everybody," he said. "Make sure you get a good sleep now. We should have a crane ready to put Percy back on rails tomorrow, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to go out again tonight." "That's all right," said Thomas, as he shunted safely back into his shed. "We enjoyed ourselves, didn't we?" But Annie and Clarabel were sound asleep. His driver said, "Good night," or "Is it good morning, Thomas?" Thomas looked out of the shed window. He thought to himself, "I must ask the driver to fit the snowplough when he comes back," and then fell fast asleep. By the afternoon, the island of Sodor was covered in snow. Thomas, Annie and Clarabel were rested and full of energy. The driver fitted the snowplough and they set off back to the mail depot. There, Percy was feeling foolish and thoroughly derailed. "I really am sorry about this, Thomas." "Don't worry," said Thomas. "The fat controller told me he will have a crane over here by tomorrow, so you don't have long to wait." This time, Annie and Clarabel were enjoying the night's work. It grew colder and colder. Because he was working so hard and the fireman kept stoking the boiler, Thomas didn't notice. When they were crossing the bridge over the river, he suddenly heard a quacking sound. "It's a duck," Thomas said to himself. "What's he doing awake at this hour?" "Help!" quacked the duck. The driver looked over the bridge at the river. "It's Donald's duck and she's frozen," he said. "The river's all ice." "Help!" quacked Donald's duck once more. "I've damaged my wing. I can't fly and I can't get off the ice. I'm very cold and I'm quite hungry." Thomas explained the situation to the driver. "Oh dear," he replied. "It won't be safe for me or the fireman to go on the ice, but we just can't leave her there. We'll have to call for help." Thomas whistled loudly for about 10 minutes. For miles around, lights came on in the houses as people wondered who was making all that noise in the middle of the night. But no one came to find out why. Thomas tried again. "Shh," said the fireman. "I can hear something." In the distance was the whirring sound of Harold the helicopter. Thomas whistled again, and before long Harold was hovering overhead. "Evening, Thomas," he called. "I'm on safety patrol because of the bad weather. You know, rescuing people and that sort of thing. It looks as if I'm needed here. Well, you can depend on me." "Quack," said the duck. "Quack what?" asked Harold. The driver explained. "If you can just go and rescue Donald's duck," he said, "we can take care of her on the train." "Easy," said Harold, and flew down towards the river. But it wasn't easy. Every time Harold drew near to Donald's duck, the wind from the rotor blades blew her across the ice so that she couldn't hop on board. "Wait!" shouted Thomas. "I've got an idea. Why don't you sort of blow her towards the riverbank?" It was a very good idea. Harold carefully positioned himself and blew Donald's duck towards the side of the frozen river. Once there, she hopped onto Harold and was carried to the bridge where Thomas was waiting. "Well done, Harold," said Annie and Clarabel. "You are our hero."
Just doing my job,
said Harold. Then he flew off in search of someone else to rescue. The fireman and driver soon had Donald's duck warm and snug at the back of the cab. "The wing is not badly hurt," said the fireman. "You'll be as right as rain in a couple of days." "Quack! I'd rather be as right as rain, quack, than as wrong as ice," quacked Donald's duck. When they returned to the shed, the Fat Controller gave his driver and fireman permission to take care of Donald's duck for a few days until she recovered.
"But first,"
he said,
"you must get some rest. You've all worked splendidly and helped us out of a difficult situation. I'll tell the others not to disturb you until you've had some sleep."
But they had very little sleep that day, and for the next 3 days, Donald's duck would not stop talking. She talked about this, and she talked about that, or she talked about nothing at all. She was having a quacking good time, and she wanted everyone to know about it. Quack! All the engines and carriages liked her very much, but they were pleased when the ice melted and Donald's duck flew back to the river. In no time at all, spring had arrived. The Fat Controller told all the drivers, firemen and guards to sweep out the shed and to give the engines and carriages a good spring clean. The engines like spring, but look forward to summer most of all. Then, in no time at all, summer arrived. As there were so many holidaymakers travelling, there were 7 carriages waiting for Thomas to take to Gordon the big blue engine. But Thomas's driver had not taken on enough water. The only engines not out pulling carriages were the young twins Bill and Ben. They weren't fully trained yet, and spent their days working in the quarry with the trucks. Bill and Ben didn't work together very well. One would say push, while the other would shout pull, so nothing would move. The Fat Controller called them over.
"Thomas needs to go to the water tower. You must take him there."
Bill and Ben were so happy they had been given a grown-up job at last. Bill and Ben proudly escorted Thomas from the water tower back to the shed where their carriages were waiting. Now they had learned to cooperate, it didn't take them very long to move the carriages into position for Thomas to be coupled up in front of them. "Oh, Thomas," they said, "you do look smart. Do you think you could ask the Fat Controller if we can go with you to Gordon's station?" Thomas's driver went to see the Fat Controller. After a brief discussion, the Fat Controller made a decision.
"Bill and Ben, as you have been really useful engines, I think you can go with Gordon and Thomas to the seaside."
Soon the little twins were cheerily chuffing down the line behind Thomas and Gordon, on their way to the seaside. What an adventure!